All right, welcome back to the F3 Northeast Wake Q Source podcast. With me today, the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Dave Monaco, Dumbledore. Dumbledore, thanks for gracing us with your presence today on the podcast.
Thanks, Money Pit. Good to be with you.
Yeah. Hey, before we go any further,
Yeah,
I love people's names, and I probably don't ask it enough. I'm going to
I
ask you
know
how
I
you
don't
got
ask
your
enough for
name.
sure. Yeah.
We don't always get that story, and I'll probably bring it more into the podcast. But for those who don't know, why Dumbledore? Where did that name come from?
Yeah, I think it was pretty easy. You get inside the COT. You're like, tell us about yourself. I was like, well, I worked in schools for 30 plus years and was the head of a school, and it was like Dumbledore. And I don't know who shouted it out, but it didn't take very long. I was back in the outer circle in about 35 seconds.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I
You
spent
know it
three
when you hear it, right?
yeah, I spent 3 decades plus in the education space. I'm a nonprofit consultant now in sort of this phase of my life, but I think I was pretty easy pickings.
And at some stint at
Yeah,
Ravenscroft
I
to
was there
boot,
for
right? Which kind
16.
of has a little bit of that
I
aura
was
from the
probably
outside,
part of
right?
it. Yeah, I was at private school, so the whole notion of the whole notion of being being in that type of environment, I think played in well.
Yeah, well, good deal. So, if you're following along in the book, we are in the second quadrant. Today, we're going to be talking Q 2.4, positive habit transfer. So, hopefully, based on the name Dumbledore, you start to figure out why I invited Dumbledore on, why I thought he would be the perfect guest. As you know, I'm looking for the guys who live it out, who know it, who have real world experience.
Yeah.
And so, love to just chop it up a little bit about positive habit transfer. I know you're a leadership guy. I know you've trained lots of
hmm
leaders.
hmm
So, we'd love to just hear your thoughts about how habits play into our lives and our results. We'll just start with just kind of open thoughts and comments there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's James Clear in Atomic Habits says, essentially we sink to the level of our systems, and
Yeah.
essentially habits are the internal systems that we create for ourselves. And so if you really want to drive performance at the end of the day, you got to check whether you're leading a company, organization, what are the habits or systems that are part of that culture. And I think each of us as individuals have to audit how we spend our time and where we commit our energies against what we value. And you build habits that hopefully move you to closer alignment with your values.
I mean, Mike Tyson said it best, right? Everybody's got a plan until you get punched
Yeah,
in the mouth,
that's
right?
right.
What's he talking about? He's talking about habits, right?
That's
What have
right.
you ingrained in your life through habits that when all hell breaks loose,
That's exactly
you're going
it.
to resort to that? What is already in there? And so we're talking about being intentional about the habits that we have, right?
That's exactly right. And I think for most of us that have been drawn to F3, a lot of it has to do with two components of habit that can be really important in our lives, like how we take care of our body
Yeah.
and how we take care of our spiritual selves,
Yeah.
right? And so not that we should refer to going to any type of worship on a regular basis as a habit, but it's a
Hmm.
practice.
Yeah.
And so how are you cultivating that faith part of your life? And then certainly on the fitness side, I think everybody that convenes however many times a week has built that in as a habitual practice.
Yeah. Yeah, love it. We were chopping up a little bit before the interview, and it's been brought up a couple of times the last couple episodes, and I think it was Shark Bait who brought it up at the table. I mentioned this last episode. We're almost halfway through the book, and anybody who's read leadership books, especially John Maxwell, Maxwell says believes that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. But we haven't even talked about influence until halfway into the book, and he asked our table a question. If that's true, why did Dredd take so long to get to that influence? And the answer is what the first quadrant is about. And you were bringing that up, the importance of the first quadrant. If you want to expound on that a little bit, why we even go there before we even move to the leadership side.
Yeah, I mean, and it says it in this particular chapter too, like you can't give something away that you don't own,
Yeah.
and so what is it that you practice? What is it that you practice faithfully? Kuzin and Posner, another great leadership theorists, their first law of leadership is, you do what you say you will do. How do
Mm,
you deliver on those things that you attest to be part of your core and your value? And so for those of us that are wandering around and don't have an anchoring around a set of values that then get manifested as habits and practices, we're not much help to those around us,
Right.
honestly. So
Right.
you really do have to start there.
Yeah. So Dredd says, we got to get right before we
That's
can
right.
live right.
That's right.
And and really by now we've actually been doing positive habit transfer this whole book as we've, gone through how our eating practices, our fitness practices, our relationships with the important people in our life are all creating those habits that we live by.
That's right.
And so hopefully if we've taken this content seriously, we've been working on those habits and not even known it. And so at this point now we're at a place where if we've developed these habits, now we have something to give, right?
Absolutely. And again, the question is, do you do you have to intentionally give it away, or just by the very fact of showing up and practicing your habits regularly, you're transferring it, right? So I
Yeah.
think about our role as parents, right? I've got 320 somethings. By the time our kids are that age, the biggest struggle for us as parents is, this is what I think he should be doing. But at that point, the hay is really in the barn. Like, my guys are, in all likelihood, going to choose the habits that are going to be part of their foundational life based on what they've observed from me and my wife. And so, like, Shine's like, hey, what I think you should do, the magical danger word for parents, what you
Right.
should do, I think you should do when we start giving those demands out and try to force the transfer of whatever habits we think are best, you end up meeting with a lot of resistance. So sometimes just get your practices right, get yourself right, and the transfer will happen invisibly, magically.
Right. So rather than prescribing, they're
Correct.
watching,
Yep.
right? They're catching,
Yep.
right? It
I mean,
reminds me of,
sometimes it's helpful to do that, right? Like, I've had definitely
yeah,
situations in working with young people my entire life where the rubber meets the road and you need to be clear about where they're falling short and where the habits that they have are, in the point of this chapter, negative habits or maybe neutral habits. And they need a change. So there come those times, but that's the hardest point of our lives, is in our relational capacity with our family and with those that are close to us, is when to choose to be direct
right.
and when to choose not to be. There's no magic and right answer there, because every relationship and every person is unique. But
Yeah, I mean, you're starting to put your finger on the next couple of chapters. And so, spoiler alert, the chapter after this is accountability, and after that is correction, right? And so you're
it's right.
mentioning those needful places in our leadership that we will eventually have to hold someone accountable, and eventually we're going to have to probably provide correction. But what I love about this methodology is before you can really stand in a place to hold someone accountable or correct them, you better be living right where you're actually in a place where you're positively transferring the good habits. Because if I don't have that sure foundation with you where I've been like transferring good habits to you, how can I hold you accountable to something that I'm not living by or I'm not imparting? And how can I correct bad behavior in you if I don't have that in me? So I
Yeah.
love the way that Dredd is kind of building this like a foundation, like because you're going to need to go there in leadership with accountability and correction. And the way we were able to do that well is if we all along have been transferring positive habits to the people we're leading.
Yeah. And I mean, let's be honest. I mean, F3's got this beautiful range of ages. I'm
Hmm.
almost 58, right?
Hmm.
So it gets harder and harder the older we get
Hmm.
to start to deconstruct habit. It's
Hmm.
difficult for any of us, but the
Right.
older you get, the more entrenched you are. So a lot of this getting right practice is, do I even have eyes up on which of my habits have become neutral or negative to those
Wow.
around me or even to
Right.
myself? So, like, are we listening to the cues and signals? Are we
Right.
asking ourselves actively and reflectively? Is it was a habit I gave up January 1st. Like, I'm spending way too much time scrolling on Instagram. Like, took it off my phone, right?
Yeah.
Took it off. Um, I want to do more with F3. So here are the habits that I want to ingrain. Like, I'm going to queue more. I'm going to go to these. I'm going to go to the jingle
That
meetups.
jingle
Like,
mingle. Yeah.
making intentional steps to kind of work to newer and healthier habits. I think the admonition for those of us in F3 is this: like, as you're getting older, right? Life is complicated and challenging. We want to settle and have some
Yeah.
stability around us. And so we're not too interested in pitching old habits and starting new ones. So
but you
what's your
can.
practice? What's your
So
practice for self-evaluation is the ultimate question.
oh, so if it's harder and harder to learn new habits, maybe one habit that would help us the earlier we adopt it is that self-evaluation.
That's right. That's
Because
right.
if
It's like,
that's a habit, then we're okay with new habits because it's part of my habit is I evaluate and I correct. I evaluate and I
yep.
correct.
And who in your inner circle, either by intentionally asking them or by just listening better to them, is cueing you that your practices or habits are maybe not leading to you thriving or to the unit of which you're a part, work team, family team, core friend team. Like the habits that you're practicing are just not allowing you or that group to thrive. So are you even listening? Sometimes all you gotta do is pay attention. My
Yeah,
wife
that's
gives me
right.
the little needles if some of my practices and habits are neutral or negative. And so then it's up to me to make those adjustments. But you can also take a proactive stance of 30 minutes of quiet time a week to audit your past
Right. Yeah.
week and look at how you allocated your time and figure out which of those time allocations were positive and led to you thriving or led to those in your inner community thriving and which didn't, and then see how much they've been repeated over the last previous weeks. And if you're seeing them too often, say, well, what am I going to do to shift that? Right. There are practices that you can actually put into place
Yeah.
to begin to look at your habits and get yourself right.
There's two other concepts I want to make sure we hit before we run out of time. So, a lot of this chapter talks about the importance of who you spend your time with.
Yeah,
And so we've been talking intentionally about the habits we're trying to have or impart, but this is going on whether subconsciously, whether we're aware of it or
correct.
not, right? People are passing stuff around, and the more we're around someone, the more of their habits we're absorbing, whether we realize it or not. So I'd love to get just I know you've trained leaders and are intentional about this. Our environments matter and who we spend time with matters.
Yeah, I mean, paraphrasing, but you are essentially a compilation of the five people with whom you spend the most time. That's sort
Hmm.
of one of the axioms that's out there. And so, evaluating who's sourcing content to you and information to
Hmm.
you, who around you is creating, like from whom are you receiving the transfer of habits, right? So
Yeah, right,
who in your inner circle do you find to be folks from whom you're learning and evolving and being pushed to change because wow, what he or she is doing is important. Jim Collins, Good to Great talks about having your personal board of directors, right? So who are the 10 to 12 people who you seek out for counsel, who you look to emulate, whose lives you think are lives worth mirroring in certain ways,
Mm,
right? So that's just an example of habit transfer, right? Where you're
yeah,
actively looking to cultivate in your environment the types of people who continue to fortify you, but also continue to push you. Because the people around you, they aren't really pushing you. You ain't
right.
getting any better.
Well, let me put you on the spot for a second. What are you doing? Just if you wouldn't mind sharing one or two things, or as many as you feel comfortable. What are you doing intentionally around this topic? Whether it's you're intentionally choosing people, environments,
Mm.
or other things that you intentionally seek out because you know the power of this that might help open the eyes of someone who hasn't been intentional about their habits. They've kind of just absorbed where they've been, and hopefully it's been good. But what can people start doing intentionally if you wouldn't mind just kind of being personal about it?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it's if not daily, like weekly practice of evaluation of time. Like time audits are incredibly powerful. So if you just
Wow.
look back over a past week and try to assess where your time is allocated, you will begin to see reflected those things that you value. It doesn't take more
Right.
than 30 minutes on a Sunday to look back at your calendar from last week and then to look ahead at your calendar to come and say, are the primary tasks that are in front of me this week? If somebody were to drop in from the moon and shadow you for a week, and
Right.
at the end of the week, they were asked, what is it that Blake values based on the
Right.
time you spent with him? How would they answer it? Right.
Hmm.
So that allows you to look at, did I commit some time to my social relationships and cultivating them? Was my spiritual life taken care of with prayer or attendance at a service? Did I tend to my fitness for that? Was I engaged in meaningful work? Right. How much? Too much or too little? Like all of those
So
things.
you'll actually
March.
look back at your week and
Yeah.
and look at your
Yeah.
calendar and think what were the meetings? How did I spend my time?
That's right.
And have you corrected from that? Has it been eye-opening as you did that?
Oh yeah, I've certainly done like I'm in a phase of life where I'm essentially like reimagining myself, right? Left core
Nice.
career, left
Yeah.
core identity behind
Yep.
intentionally,
Yep.
right? To try to envision what my life would be like. So I've continued to make adjustments and ask questions of myself as to whether the time I'm allocating to what is now my work world versus the time that I build around relationships, my physical well-being, my intellectual stimulation. I'm continually tweaking that at this phase of transition in my life as I try to figure out a life that's a little less work dependent, or a little
Mhm.
less work consumed than where my core career was. And so like a piece of that is I coached football at Ravenscroft for the 16 years that I was there. And so I have now these alums, these guys
Yeah.
that are 32 to 48 that I coach while I was there. And I want to have time weekly to be in communication with them, text or meetups or what have you, and to be asking them some of these same questions, like,
Hmm.
so what are you realizing about being a dad? And
Right.
where do you feel like you're thriving in your life or struggling at this point, right? And so, in some cases, that will lead to habit transfer for them. Most of them are struggling with figuring out how to take care of themselves physically because they're allocating a lot of time to work and their kids or young families. So people are challenged by this. This is hard, but that's the best thing that I do is just try to take a reflective look at how my time is allocated on a weekly basis.
And so obviously through that, then we can identify, you start to not only identify how you spend your time, but you start to identify the influences in your life that maybe you hadn't
Yeah,
thought of,
yeah.
right? And
Yeah, your time is a reflection of your values, right?
yeah,
And
right.
so, really if you take an honest assessment of it, and you can do it from a 30,000 foot view, or you can be very intentional by over the course of a week as you live it, doing it in hourly increments or 4 hour increments and saying, this is where I spent my time. You can kind of audit it that way.
Well, I think
But
what I'm getting out of this, the thought that's provoking inside of me is I think, yeah, as husbands and dads, immediately I can't help but think, if I look at my time, does it reflect my love for my kids or my wife, right? And that, but the second layer that I'm getting out of this conversation is I can see the sources of transfer that I'm getting. I can identify like what I'm receiving, right? I'm receiving habit transfer. Time with you, I'm receiving good habit transfer. Time with other people, I'm receiving that too. And can I audit it not just in how do I value my time, but also like am I okay with what I'm maybe receiving from that person by spending time with them? You know, if I'm spending time with someone who's got bad habits, has a poor marriage, is not a good father, is has a failing business, maybe it's not someone I want to be receiving with. I might want to help them, love them, but need to
yeah,
probably be careful about the amount of time I'm spending because are they potentially transferring something to me inadvertently that
yeah.
I don't want for my life, right?
Yeah, no,
Just
it's
by
insightful. I mean, time and people audit. Like
Mhm.
who's getting most of my time? Are they amplifiers or detractors? That was another concept that I've spoken a lot about in my work with young people. So, young people are very socially oriented, and so I would spend a lot of time
Yeah.
in talking to groups of kids around, are you an amplifier? Do you amplify a group? Do you bring richness to a group, or are you a detractor? And so when you look at that inner circle, to your point, if you're not just looking at time, which is depersonalized, but if you look at the people in your life, are you around more amplifiers, people with an abundance mindset, or are you
Right.
around people who are detractors? They're making you
Yeah.
actually a little bit more neutral or worse for being with them, or
Right.
they're actually in some ways about scarcity. These are really powerful questions that you
I
can
mean,
ask if you're
the
doing that.
easiest way for us to recognize this concept is if you think about your kids. So I've got 14 and 12-year-old, and I've got a year and a half old, and my 12-year-old is so different depending on the friend she's with. There are certain friends, they're happy, they come alive, they're good to be around, they're joyful around us. And she's got a friend that brings her down and they're negative and they're critical and she doesn't realize it because she's only 12, right? Well, the same thing is going on with us,
Yeah,
right? And so we
yeah,
should be aware. I guess I want to, as we kind of land the plane, I want to encourage the packs that are listening. You're making a difference if you're coming to F3, if you're
that's
listening
right.
to this podcast,
That's right.
you're already are have developed some good habits, and I want you to know that you're transferring those habits into the kids today.
Absolutely.
And I want to tell a story that I heard from a friend of mine last Friday. because I think most of us undervalue what we do for our communities just by being ourselves. And when you understand the impact that you can have, you start to be a little bit more intentional about how you enter your community and the time you spend. So, I had an older gentleman, he's probably about your age, at a men's breakfast I go to on Fridays, and he was telling a story. You know, he grew up in a non-Christian home. They were anti. Okay, and his dad was just a not loving, kind of spiteful, grumpy kind of guy. And when he went off to college, he he met Christ and he became a Christian, and it changed his life dramatically. And his parents were not supportive of that. And so through his whole adult life, he has this not great relationship with his dad. Most of it knows his dad as a grumpy, angry, dark person. And so, relationship wasn't close, but they stayed in touch. Well, about a month ago, his dad found out he's really sick, sick enough to where hospice is involved. And he went to visit his dad, and he was asking his dad how he was doing. And his dad, for like the first time he's ever heard, was not scared of death, and he was hopeful. And he said, "Well, tell me more." He's like, "Because I know where I'm going. And I know I'm going to meet Jesus on the other side." And he was like flabbergasted. How is this possible? I've never had this conversation with my dad. And he spent most of his adult life feeling bad that he wasn't able to help his dad with his faith and be able to transfer that habit to his dad. He'd never been able to preach the gospel to his dad. And what he's realizing now, and those of us in the room help him understand, there's no way like you never presented the gospel to your dad in word. You presented it to him your
Correct.
whole life in the way
That's
you
right.
lived life because he's a very
That's right.
loving man. He is like one of the most positive people I've been around. Your dad is at this place at the end of his life because he watched you live.
Yeah.
He was transferring that habit the whole
Yeah.
way, and now his dad is the beneficiary, though he didn't realize that's going on. And the same thing is happening in the lives of the people in our lives and in your life, Pax. You are transferring as they see you get up to the workouts. They see you be part of these men who are doing things in the community,
Yeah.
that your habits are changing. You are imparting that. And I want you to know that you're making a difference.
Amen to that. Well said. And I think that's, when it goes around the COT and people are like, why you come to F3? It's essentially what folks are talking about. So I think you nailed it. A lot of positive habit transfer happening every morning in the gloom.
Yeah, in the gloom. Well, any parting comments for the Pax as we
No,
wrap
I
up?
enjoyed it. Thanks for putting these together for the group again. Part of the positive habit transfer is getting on Slack every week or so and seeing what the incredible folks in F3 are sharing out. So thanks for everybody for sharing their wisdom.
Yeah, yeah, I'll echo that. I love to hear people are sharing the Bible studies they're starting, the books they're reading, the thoughts they're having, maybe even just the laughs and the jokes. We're transferring the habit through the joy that we're spreading, the support that we're giving each other. Slack is a great place to continue to do that.
Yeah,
So, Dumbledore, thanks for being my guest this week on the F3 Q Source podcast.
you
Pax,
got
we
it,
will
Money
see you
Pit.
this week at the Q Source table.
We'll see you, buddy.